Well, this is going to be a very difficult part to review because a major theme of it has to deal a lot with race relations. As you can obviously tell, I am white, so can I really comment on such things? I'll try my best to avoid this minefield that this chapter sets up, but I just want to give that disclaimer before going any further with this. So the book picks right off where the last part left. Tara is somewhat getting back to normal, but there's a few little daily challenges that Tara faces. But the biggest one of all comes in the winter. So with Will and Ashley being on the plantation, they're the ones that are going out. They're the ones getting groceries, getting news, as well as just trying to make sense of this very odd time in American history called Reconstruction. In ways, I was looking forward to learning a little more about Reconstruction. I remember we briefly went over it in history class, but the only things we ever really went over was there were two plans as to how the South would be reassimilated with the Union. Abraham Lincoln realized that both sides had just suffered enough and we should just get together before any more bleeding happens. And Andrew Johnson, he wanted the South to pay for their treachery. And since Lincoln was killed at the hands of John Wilkes Booth, it was the Johnson plan that went into action. So with that, you can get a little idea about how dark this particular part gets. So the first big thing. Will comes in from the cold, warming himself by the fire, and says, "How much more money do you have?" To which Scarlett says, "Yeah, I've only got a $5 gold piece." Which Will is like, that's not nearly going to be enough. They've increased the taxes to $300. Which, to kind of put it into perspective, about $1 back then is worth about 20 in today's economy. So that roughly comes to about $6,000 for a very struggling farm. Scarlett is at a loss for words. Since there are men on the plantation now, she no longer wears the pants in the family, but rather the socks. So she goes to Ashley for advice. And there, we see that Ashley is really no help. He is a relic from a different time that just doesn't really exist in this modern era. His home is in a rich mansion, reading nothing but the greatest and latest in academia, and he is not cut out for farm work, even though he is trying his best. But there are two major things that happen from that conversation. First, Ashley doesn't have a clue as to how to be able to fix any of this. And on top of that, Scarlett realizes that Ashley is still very much in love with Scarlett. However, he is too much of a gentleman. Even if Melanie were to die, he still wouldn't be able to go for it because he has honor. So, Scarlett has to do the unthinkable. She is going to sell herself to Rhett Butler. Now, this is a very famous scene in both the movie and the book, and it's also been fantastically parodied in the Carol Burnett show. Scarlett doesn't want to appear poor, Rhett Butler, and so she makes a new dress out of curtains. Now, where did she get the design for this dress? Well, that is a story within itself. So, the former manager of the plantation, he was kicked out for embezzling money, but this time he is back, and he is a really rich person. He comes with his wife, basically saying, looks like you've kept this place in pretty good shape for my eventual return. And there, Scarlett is able to spot the dress, but not before forcibly kicking both of them off the property and saying, "If I can't raise that money, I'm going to burn this place to the ground." So the design is made, and she is off to Atlanta to try to bargain with Rhett Butler. As I mentioned before, she was very much wearing the pants of the family when she was the only one in charge, but now that there's men in the house, she's just wearing the socks. And Mammy refuses to leave her side, which is going to make prostitution very difficult. But that is not the only difficulty in the affair. The first thing is that Rhett Butler has been placed under arrest for killing a recently freed slave. So Scarlet has to figure out how she can sneak away into the prison, as well as gain the attention of one of the Union officers in order to even talk with Rhett Butler. It is a very difficult thing, but she does manage to do it. And in fact, she tells a lie saying that she is Rhett's sister, to which all the Union troops are like, another sister? How many sisters does this guy have? We've kicked out about 6 fake ones already. But Scarlet is one of the few people that Rhett actually wants to see at this point, so he plays along with it. Sister darling, it's been a long time. Eventually they are able to convince the guards to just leave the pair alone. Of course, they're outside of the doors, so that way none of them can make any escape. And there, Scarlet tries her best to get the money. This ends up in an utter failure. First thing is, Rhett can't tap into any of the money that he is also being charged of stealing. Because if he were to do that, it would make himself even more suspicious. And even more so, Rhett can't stand the idea that Scarlet lied to him in the first place. Now this scene plays out very differently in the movie, as Rhett is not under arrest but living a life of luxury, because he realized how you can make money out of a crumbling empire. In the movie, Rhett is able to spot right away that Scarlet is just wearing drapery, and is able to see right through her lies. Which, in all honesty, I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen that way in the book, as it very much points out that Rhett is a connoisseur of women's fashion, and so he should have been able to pick out that this was an imitation dress made out of inferior material. But, all the same, Scarlet is utterly heartbroken, and because it's raining, her dress is just slowly getting ruined as she's trying to figure out how to be able to walk back to Aunt Pitty's place. It is there that she bumps into Frank Kennedy. Now this is something I forgot to mention in the last part, so during Christmas Day, there was a lot of Confederates that stayed at Tara, and they had a bit of a party, and Frank very much took a liking to Sue Ellen, Scarlet's younger sister. They get to talking, and Frank says that he is doing quite prosperously due to this new store he has. Much like that Yankee officer, he was collecting the refuse that was left behind of many southern homes, and he was selling it at a little bit of a profit. And it is there that Scarlet hatches a plan. She is going to woo Frank, as well as convince him that Sue Ellen no longer loves him. It is something that is definitely a bit more on the immoral side, but Scarlet is willing to do anything to keep Tara from falling, especially to somebody so vile as the last manager of the place. Crazy enough, the plan works, and she is able to secure the money. However, life goes on. Everybody needs to eat at Tara, and while Frank is doing a very good job at making it a halfway prosperous farm, everybody is just doing horribly when it comes to finances. So, Scarlet eventually worms her way into the store, basically saying, "Ugh, you got so many people here that owe you a ton of money, why don't you try to collect on these debts?" But Frank is just such a gentle soul that he just doesn't have the heart to be able to ask in advance for all the money that is rightfully owed to him. Scarlet, though, has other plans, which works out pretty well, as Frank has often been down with pneumonia during the Civil War, and it's something that started right up again. So she was able to look into the books and figure out who the name of all these debtors were and started to do something about it. And on top of that, she notices that the store is just completely disheveled. Everything is unorganized, and some of the produce that he's selling is just not kept in very good places. The store manager, at that time, steps out for lunch, while Scarlet is left to try to get some sort of organization going on. That is when Rhett Butler comes in. He looks around and says, You really couldn't wait for me, could you? All I just needed was a month, and then I would have given you the money, you know? But as usual, Scarlet is not in the mood for this. And she tries her best to throw him out. But at the same time, there is quite a fair bit of respect from Rhett, as he realizes that on that day at the barbecue where they first met, she probably didn't even know how many quarters used to make $1. Scarlet starts to soften up a little bit for two reasons. Not only the mutual respect, but now that Rhett is able to give away some of the money, she needs it for another business venture, sawmills. This is something that Frank very much wanted to do himself, but in giving the money to Tara, he didn't have enough money to be able to get the sawmills up and running. So Rhett loaned Scarlet the money to be able to start up the sawmill. And this is something that is just completely scandalous throughout the town. Frank is too gentle of a soul to tell Scarlet no, because she has a way of making it seem like she's about to rip your head off if you don't agree with her. And on top of that, she is withholding love. So every time Frank is good to her, she is good to him. And every time Frank is bad to her, she is bad to him. So the sawmill is going around okay, but it's kind of hard to find a halfway decent manager because, well, once again, all the southern people just have too much pride. And the idea of working for a woman is something that is very much beneath most of these people. There is one who manages to do it because he has no other options for money. But he is just as bad as managing the place as Frank is with the store. But despite it all, it works. And on top of that, Hugh Elsing, the one taking care of the sawmill, Scarlet can go about and start selling her lumber. This is something that actually has quite a fair bit of an advantage, because Scarlet can lie about the prices as well as the superiority of her product. And any southern gentleman would never call a lady a liar. And so, she is able to get away with quite a fair bit in terms of the lumber business. While Scarlet was doing all her rounds at the sawmill, she very much got associated with most of the Yankees that were moving south there at that point. They were basically the only ones that had money. Now, what is really quite fascinating is that pretty much all the Yankees worth their salt read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And from there, they wanted to ask her so many details about the book. How much of it was true? Did you ever whip a slave to death? Did you have bloodhounds? Did you have all this crazy stuff? To which Scarlett's just kind of like, no, we didn't do any of that stuff. And to me, I just kind of draw parallels about people that say read a whole bunch of manga and then go to Japan and be like, wow, this is something completely different. However, I'm not denying that the events of Uncle Tom's Cabin probably did happen at one point, but at least for the O'Hara family, that is not something that happened. Business is booming. And in fact, with all the money she was able to make, she even buys a second sawmill. And this is just not only writhing up Frank because she can no longer have company, as so many people see him as just an inferior man for not telling his wife off for all the unwomanly things she's doing, like making a living. But Frank is really the only one that cares because Scarlet is like, money. This is something that is very important. It's the only way to be able to get ahead in life. And on top of that, she has just been plagued with nightmares about that time at Tara where she was the one that was in charge of feeding all the people there. And all along the way, everyone was hungry, including herself. In fact, she even gave up some of her rations to some of the other people at Tara just so they wouldn't starve. And it was there that she made a promise that she would never go hungry again. And she is going to make good on that promise, regardless of what the neighbors might say about her. But there is one major issue that happens. A letter comes in from Will. Occasionally he writes about how Tara is going. But this letter has some very distressing news. Gerald has died. Now the main thing to note here is that Scarlet is pregnant with Frank's baby. This was Frank's way of trying to get her mind off the mills, basically saying, oh, you know, she's a woman. As soon as she has a baby, that's all that'll consume her mind. Which, this is just confusing. It's just like Charles all over again. Did people not know that having sex was how you have children? She never wanted children in both ways, but yet somehow she ended up pregnant. There's nothing magical about it. I mean, unless, I don't know, Frank or Charles was just doing it in her sleep. Okay, I don't want to think about it like that. But anyway, she goes to Tara in a very advanced pregnant state, which is interesting, as she was saying that she'd be having the baby in May, but it's June and she still hasn't had it at this point. But anyway, on the way to Tara, Will somehow is holding on to that beat-up carriage that got her back to Tara the first time. It brings back some bad memories, but Scarlet wants to know. What happened to Gerald? If he was sick, you should have told us about it, and how come all the neighbors are just like, you should kill Sue Ellen for this? So, what happened? Sue Ellen is a bit of a spoiled brat, to put it bluntly. While everybody else at Tara is perfectly fine with just reusing clothes until they wear out their usefulness, Sue Ellen is used to being in a rich house, to be pampered, to be able to buy new dresses once a month. And so, she hatched a bit of a scheme. It has been said that any plantation owner that took the oath of the Union would be paid $150,000 for damages to the plantation. Now, once again, roughly about $20 in today's money is $1 back then. That'd be $6 million. So with Gerald being in this far-gone state, he's willing to go along with Sue Ellen's plan. But as he is reading over the details, as well as Sue Ellen talking about what this document is for, it all of a sudden comes back to him. The inner mechanisms of mind start to go into overdrive, and all of a sudden, he is his old self again. He realizes what the oath is, he tears it up right in front of him, and then he decides to go for a victory horseback through the field. Unfortunately, this is what ended up being his demise. He wanted to jump over a hedge just like he used to do in his olden days. He did, fell off the horse, and then quickly broke his neck. He died before anybody could even get to him. But he died with his boots on. And the other big development as well is that Will would be marrying Sue Ellen. This is a way to try to patch things over, which is annoying as had her eyes on the second oldest sister. However, even she agrees that this is the only way that they wouldn't try to lynch Sue Ellen for this. And so, she is going to be going off to a convent. On the way, Scarlet wonders how she ever stayed away from Tara for so long. And she also very much admires the handiwork of Will. But there is one other piece of distressing news that Will tells, is that Ashley and Melanie are trying their best to be able to leave Tara. Ashley has some very stubborn, masculine pride, and he can't take the idea that he's taking all this charity from a woman. And on top of that, even if Scarlet was Samson, he would still very much feel ashamed because he is a man. He wants to provide for Melanie. He doesn't want to live off of other people's charity. But there is no time to think of that now. And if you were to do a shot every time that particular phrase was said in this part of the book, you'd be pretty sloshed. The funeral, despite being so short notice, there's a lot of people that showed up for it. And there is a bit of fear as to what would happen, as it's very customary that some of the neighbors would come up and say a few words. And obviously there'd be quite a few people that just want to put Sue Ellen right over the coals. However, Will goes up there first, and he diffuses the entire situation, as well as saying that you can't make fun of my future wife. This is able to settle things, but it's not necessarily the best, as there's so many people saying, Sue Ellen is an upper class lady, and this person is just white trash. She's too good for him. To which Scarlett is just kind of like, who cares? Here's somebody that can actually watch after Tara. He's producing money. He's useful. Unlike most of you people. She didn't say that last part. That's something I added in myself. So after the funeral, Scarlett has it out with Ashley. She wants to know why he's going away. And at first Ashley is just like, well, who told you that? To which she's just like, it's Will. He knows everything. Why are you going away? To which he gives a whole spiel about how he wants to have honor, how he needs to be able to protect his poor and defenseless wife, and yada yada yada, all the rhetoric that you probably expect at this point. However, Scarlett offers a solution. She needs another person to look after the mill, because the first one, while bleeding money, is at least competent. The second one is just awful. And so she would want somebody that she can trust at the mill. Ashley, however, just sees this as another handout and refuses. It is then that Scarlett just all of a sudden starts bawling, not really knowing what else to do. Melanie hears the commotion, and she's just like, Ashley, what have you done to the poor girl? Ashley relates the story, and Melanie's just like, oh, hush. You're being so selfish. The idea that she did everything for you, and you can't do her this small favor of being able to work at her sawmill to be able to help pay your own way. How selfish of you. And on top of that, I want to live in Atlanta. But honey, I thought you wanted to go up north, I was going to be a big banker up in New York somewhere. Oh, forget that. There's no family up in New York. We're not wanted there anyway. There's people in Atlanta that do like us. And so with his arm twisted, he goes to the sawmill. So before we get into this next part, I'm going to have to delve a little bit into the whole race relationship aspect of this time in history. I guess maybe I'll just say it the way the book presents it, and if you find something contradictory in your own research, well, that just means that this book isn't entirely factual. These are the views of the author, and not mine. I am just regurgitating what has been said. So the biggest thing is, the book states that freeing all the slaves was very much a humanitarian crisis. These were people that had been brought up with the idea that they were nothing, less than nothing, pretty much cattle. And cattle is only good for just following directions. And now that they can make their own directions, there's a lot of people that just don't know what to do with themselves. There's a few people that even end up going back to their former masters, but as employees rather than slaves, because they want that structure back in their life again. But probably the thing that's the most interesting is the way the book presents the Freedmen's Bureau. It's very much the idea that, well, now that the former slaves have rights, it seems like they can do anything. There are tales about them just raping people, and they're perfectly, and the law just kind of turns a blind eye to it, basically saying, oh, they're just kind of getting used to civilized living. And this is very much to the dismay of all the white people, because all of a sudden they have to look at these, well, what everybody associated with cattle as someone that is rightfully equal to them. And it seems like with each passing month, they do something a little more outrageous. In fact, the book even hints the idea that there were even former slaves in high political office, with Georgia being the last holdout. This is something that was very upsetting, so for the most part, Atlanta just kind of went under martial law, as well as the whole of Georgia. This is not really something I can really fact-check myself, so if you want to be my guest, you can tell me I'm wrong. This is a period in history that I know next to nothing about, except that it ended when Rutherford B. Hayes became president because he realized that this was just not working. And in the midst of this, all the former owners, all the white people they're furious. And so, that is when the Ku Klux Klan forms. Well, it's hard to necessarily say it forms, because I guess it started as a fraternity several years before then. But this is when it became a full-on hate group. This was seen as a bit of like vigilante justice, not really seeking the justice that the white people wanted. They formed a group to be able to torment the people that were now tormenting them. Ugh, I feel like I'm definitely going to get canceled by this. But this is how the book presents it. How it actually went down, feel free to tell me. I want to know. So there was a recent part of legislation that had been turned down by Georgia lawmakers, and this incited a riot of not only the really poor and impoverished former slaves, but also just the former slaves in general. It was impossible to be able to be on the streets alone. And this is when Frank finally puts his foot down, saying, "Scarlett, you are no longer allowed to go to any of these sawmills." And once again, I am just a little confused by this. She never really cared what anybody else thought, and she never really paid much mind to Frank anyway, so I can't understand why on earth she is all of a sudden listening to him now. But she does anyway. I should probably also mention by this point she already had her child. It was a girl named Ella, named after her mother. And unlike Frank's plan, she obviously still wants to be involved with the sawmills because, well, she wants money and Frank is a horrible businessman. However, Ashley and Melanie have their own place. And one of the big things they do is they like to take in, for lack of a better term, refugees. And one of them is a very rough-looking character. An old man with only one eye, one giant gash across it, and one leg, and looks like he is death incarnate. Melanie offers him a job to be able to be Scarlett's bodyguard. Which, this is something he is very hesitant on as, well, he doesn't really respect women at all, but at the same time, pay is pay, and he's willing to go along with it, just as long as she keeps her trap shut. This arrangement works for a while, until one major business decision. So, it is revealed that he's actually an ex-convict. He had been serving life in prison before he was given the opportunity to join the Confederate Army. And if he survived, he was a free man. And so that is what his mysterious backstory is. So, obviously, he has quite a heart when it comes to convicts, and the state is leasing out convicts to be able to work anywhere they want. And with Scarlett not really having a whole lot of luck with the former slaves, she decides to lease the convicts. To which Frank says, "The day you do that is the day I quit." And so, he does. This right here is when Scarlett is fully not caring whatsoever, and she just keeps checking on the sawmills, as well as just making sure business is doing all right. At this point, Hugh has been kicked out and has been replaced with a very harsh Irishman. While he is making a lot more money than Ashley is, Scarlett is just a little bit concerned about the whole thing. So she decides to check in on the plant to realize that, well, this Gallagher is probably taking out all the hate that people had for him being an immigrant out on all these prisoners. As a good chunk of them are just skin and bones, and one of them is out sick. To which Scarlett is just like, "What have you been feeding these people?" And the Irishman is just kind of like, "Look, you said I could have free reign of the place. What does it matter to you about how I'm treating these convicts?" To which Scarlett is just kind of like, "You realize that if there's no convicts, there is no business?" To which the Irishman is just like, "Well, fine. I guess I'll just quit." And once again, Scarlet starts to tear up a little bit. To which the Irishman kind of realizes that, okay, maybe I am being a little unreasonable. You know what? How about you dock like $30 pay from me? I think that ought to even it up. To which Scarlet is just like, all right, but I'm still going to be checking in on you every so often. That night, she had to pass by a shanty town of some of the poorest of the poor. Not only those that are black, but also those that are white. This is something that she's had to do a lot of times, but this time her luck ran out. She is held hostage. She is held down where they basically just rip off her dress trying to see where in the world she could be hiding any money. But just then, a guardian angel of hers appears. So the day before, Scarlet ran into a former slave of hers, known as Big Sam. Which the main reason they call him that is because he's about like 6'4", which back at this time the average height was probably about 5'8". They reconnect a little bit, and Scarlet wanted him to be a bodyguard, but he's on the run because he killed a Union officer. However, Scarlet feels very fond for him, and she is all too happy to hear that he wants to go back to Terra, where he can have people give him orders again, to be able to have the life that unfortunately, he's quite used to at this point. She was there waiting to pick up Big Sam, take back the Aunt Pity Pats, and then to be able to take him back onto Terra. Obviously, that didn't happen, but Big Sam was still there, and he was able to fend off the attackers. 2 of them. One which Big Sam practically strangled, and the other Scarlet ran over with her carriage. She returns home to just be in a very distraught state for, well, almost narrowly being raped, in all honesty. But Frank is surprisingly calm about this. He's just kind of like, yeah, that's a shame. How about you go rest upstairs? To which Scarlet is just like, really? What kind of husband are you? I was just nearly killed or raped or had some very bad things happen to me, and that's all you have to say? But everybody in the house is in agreement. You kind of brought this upon yourself, wanting to be an independent woman despite your husband's wishes and yada yada yada. Instead, Frank goes to a political meeting. He is at the meeting. Scarlet goes over to Melanie's house, where Ashley is also at the same meeting. Everybody is just sitting there sewing. Melanie starts reading from Les Miserables. Yeah, this book seems to get a little thicker every time I look at it. But this is something that was rather interesting to the Confederate soldiers because most of them apparently read this while they were on campaign. And most of them would jokingly call it Lee's Miserables. Basically kind of talking a little bit of smack with the Confederacy. When they're all sitting there doing their sewing, Scarlet is just kind of like, okay, there's kind of like an underlying silence to this. Something is not right. What aren't you telling me? And it took a very long time to be able to worm it out of all the people that were there. But she gets her answer. Frank, as well as Ashley, are in the Klan, and their political meeting is just them going to that shanty town that she passed by and wipe out everybody that lives there. The old man that looks like death is on guard when all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. It is Rhett Butler saying that the meeting had been hijacked, that he needed to know where on earth they were. Melanie is able to give Rhett the directions, and there they get a bit of a plan going. The plan is that Rhett convinces the Union officers that all the Ku Klux Klan members were just out for a night of fun at the local whorehouse, which is something that very much embarrasses all the tight-laced and gentlemanly people of this era. But most, it's a small price to pay to not being hanged. Story goes off all right, but the biggest thing that is difficult is that Frank was killed in the altercation. And so, Rhett, as well as the person that looks like death, has to kind of make the crime scene look like it was just a barroom brawl gone bad. Now, Rhett owns stock in this whorehouse, and he is able to produce several key witnesses, and so the case is fine. But the townspeople obviously really hate Rhett for this. Not only because they hated him for being a speculator during the war, but also the idea that they all have to owe him for this. All the people in the Union are just laughing it up because, oh, all these straight-laced gentlemen, they're no better than we are. Look, they were all caught in a whorehouse, and a few people even died because of it. The wake is going on for Frank, and it's the night of when everything starts to die down, when Scarlet is just eager for some company. She would be fine if she was alone with her grief, but she very much believes all the townspeople when they say that she is the one that basically killed Frank. The only reason he joined the clan was to be able to protect her on all her trips back and forth to the sawmill. But wouldn't you know, Rhett Butler comes into the door not really caring much for decorum. They're able to have room alone in the library. You know, that's quite a bookend now that I think about it, because they first met in the library, and, well, here they are again in the library. And here Rhett proposes marriage. Scarlet at first puts up the whole facade of trying to be a lady. It's like, how dare you, Frank just barely even cold, and you're trying to propose marriage on me? And Rhett's just like, look, your last 2 marriages weren't really for love. Why don't you try something that's a little different, you know? Like, I actually can understand you. And that is what I've very much been saying myself throughout this whole book. Scarlet agrees. However, the main reason Rhett is doing this is not just so much to burn her up, but because he is going away to England for several months. Most likely to get some money from that cotton, or the Confederate money that was loaned to him at that point to be able to pay for all the guns and ammunition. So they get back to town, where both of them are just public enemies number 1. And just like before, Scarlet doesn't care. And the best part is, because Rhett is rich, she could just shove it in all of their faces. In fact, Rhett even brings this up. At the very end of this chapter, he's like, well, didn't you just always want to tell them all to go to hell? And she's like, but you're one of the people on that list. To which Rhett's just like, yeah, okay, tell me as much as you want. And that is where part 4 ends. So yeah, part 4. The longest, definitely adding a different perspective. I'm not sure if it's a correct perspective. You can feel free to tell me how wrong I am, because honestly, this is a period in history I don't know a whole lot about, and I would love to hear any perspective I can get. With that, part 5 is only about another 100 pages. Almost done with the book.